Hi everyone, welcome to day 28 of the 30-day music mini challenge. Today's topic is interleaving. What's interleaving? Interleaving? Leaving? So interleaving is when we do something and then we do something else and then we do something again. So it's basically when we kind of alternate or transition between two things. And when we learn and when we practice, this is one of the most effective ways that we can practice. So if you're like me, you grew up where you were told to just keep doing it over and over and over until you get it. Go, 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 again. And of course, this is how I've always taught, right? Again. Well, I read this wonderful book called Make It Stick, The Science of Successful Learning by Peter Brown, Henry Roediger, and Mark McDaniel. And it was a great book about the most recent research about how we learn and how we can learn more long-term, because we all want to learn long-term, right? We want to remember what we did yesterday and the day before that, and learn well throughout the semester so that we do well in the final and maybe have to redo and study less because we've done the right thing the whole way through, where things are sticking, right? Same thing with practice, right? We want to practice in a way that we maximize our time, we're the most productive, we're the most efficient, and we can get the most out of our brain, right? And we don't have to just pound like a hamster on a wheel and just find that we're just getting nowhere, right? So when we interleave, we work on something, and I mentioned this in the transitions challenge, when we do something where we work on something really hard for a few minutes or until we just barely get it, maybe a little bit, and then we go do something else, whether it's another piece or another passage or dinner or going outside or a video game or whatever, we do something else and then we come back to it. We do that few minutes of working on that tough spot again, kind of cycling through. And you might feel like, didn't I just do this already? I feel like I haven't improved at all. Because what's happening is that when we interleave, we are learning in such a way where we are accessing our long-term memory. So what's the difference between short-term and long-term memory? So short-term memory is when we just use something for just a minute or so, or whatever, just a short period of time, and then that memory goes poof. We don't need it anymore. It's short term, right? So oftentimes, like if someone gives you a phone number and you're trying to type it in, or someone gives you a number, whatever it is, or some information, and you remember it, you write it down, and then poof, it's gone. You have to look at what you wrote, or you're not really sure what your phone number is because you wrote it down once and that was it. It's in your short-term memory. We want things to be in our long-term memory. And when we access things in our long-term memory, it's sometimes difficult. So for example, if we forgot a word, or we can't remember something, but we're like, wait a second, I got this. And we kind of look. Usually we look up that way. Is that? And then we come up with it, right? Or maybe 5 minutes later we come up with it. Or maybe the next day after you wake up, or you're in the shower and then you remember it, and then of course there's no one to tell. But that's kind of long-term memory. So when we have something in there, but it's sometimes hard work to access, because what researchers have learned and what Make It Stick talks about is that whenever learning is hard, whenever it's a challenge, you're trying to remember something, what was it? You're actually strengthening the pathway to your long-term memory. So you're making that long-term memory stronger, so that if you repeat that information, you keep interleaving, you keep coming back to it. That spiral curriculum effect, as for those of you that are educators, you keep hitting the same thing just at higher and higher levels, or you just keep hitting it really, then you're accessing that long-term memory. It's more likely to stick. So when we practice, we want this to be the case, right? So when we're interleaving, when we come back to that passage, it might feel like it's the first time because we're having to access the long-term memory and it hasn't stuck yet. We have to keep interleaving. We have to keep coming back to it. And so it's frustrating when we interleave because we feel like we're not making as much progress, but we're actually making more progress. Because if we just practice the same passage over and over and over and over and over in the same session, then, well, certainly we get something out of it to a point. And then it just becomes that hamster on the wheel where we're doing a lot, but we're not getting anywhere, because then we're accessing our short-term memory and we're just looping that passage in our short-term memory, and that's it. And then we have to do the same thing the next day, right? And so we find that it's actually more helpful and we learn faster and we grow more when we do that passage, work on it, take a break, come back to it. So for example, I always taught with the pound it again, right? And you know, my students would make progress, absolutely. And then I figured this interleaving things out. I didn't figure it out. I read about it from the Make It Stick people. And I started doing this in my lessons with my private students. They'd have trouble, let's say, with the top of the chromatic scale. This is like a hard thing for a lot of flutists, right? So we'd hit it, and then we do something else. And I'd be like, random, we're going to do the top of the chromatic scale again. Oh, but then we do it. And then we take a break and do something else. And then random, we're going to do the chromatic scale again. No, it's not so random, right? But anyway, we interleave, we keep coming back to it, even within the same lesson. And the progress is just stunning. And my students are making so much more progress. And what I'm learning is that when I do this, my attention span grows because I'm having to constantly switch gears. So then I'm having to refocus and I'm having to think more in depth about what I'm doing. And I can last longer because there's a little bit more variety too. And I'm just growing faster and more, and my students are growing faster and more. And this is what we like, right? One of the things that's in a lot of people's long-term memory is riding a bike, right? And I had an experience with my son where he had just learned at the end of a summer season way back. And he had just learned, and then he didn't do it at all, right, over the winter. And then in the spring, it was like he had to redo it. And I was like, wait, it's like riding a bike. Once you learn, you have it, right? He didn't interleave. He didn't have enough repetition coming back to it. So your challenge is to interleave your practice. Keep coming back to that hard thing. And your bonus challenge is to interleave something else that's hard in your life, whether it's particular thing that you're studying or whatever. So best of luck, and I'll see you soon.